Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. Today's video is another Tales from MTG Burgeoning, LGS edition. As we have become accustomed during this series, we're not talking deck techs, we're not talking top 10s, we're not talking products, we're not talking finances. We are just talking memories while we just sit back and do one of the most relaxing things a Magic player can do, and that's just sort cards and talk about Magic. So from last we left, we were talking about... the heck were we talking about? Oh, that's right, the EDH League at my LGS. Particularly the different seasons and the decks I would play during these seasons and how I did. And we left off with Scion of the Year Dragon. Oh, never be a better deck. Never be a more successful time than with that Scion deck. I'll tell you. So that was my third full season in the EDH League. My fourth full season. And not too many more after that, I can tell you that for sure. The fourth full season, I decided to go a different level. Like I said before, new season, new deck. That's my goal. And after how wonderfully successful Scion was, I did retire him from league play. And I don't believe to this day he has made an appearance since that season where he changed it all, baby. He changed the landscape. Anyways, so for Season 4, we decided to do something a little different. I was getting pretty much infatuated with the idea of graveyard shenanigans, particularly because of the little graveyard packages I had built into that Scion of the Year Dragon deck. So I decided to take my stab at a Sultai graveyard deck. And we were going to run the Mimeoplasm. So, Devour for Power. That was one of the original commanders back in Commander 2011 when Wizards released the very first sealed commander products for the community. So the Mimeoplasm, is 2 blue, black, and a green. And when he enters the battlefield, you choose 2 creature cards in any graveyard. So they can be 2 of your own. They can be 2 and 1 opponents, or they can be one of your opponents and 1 of yours. Any combination, you choose 2 creature cards. So with that being said, with the 2 creatures get selected, Mimeoplasm becomes a copy of one of the creatures, and then the other creature gets to put X +1/+1 counters on the Mimeoplasm, where X is that creature's power. So, of course, this was just a deck, with a ton of biggins included right in the 99. And, I mean, not all of them were huge. There were also some creatures that had some really good enter the battlefield abilities. And also, some creatures that had some haste. I know for a fact let me think some of the creatures I had in that deck. I definitely had Spirit of the Night. That was in there. I definitely had Nemesis of Reason. I had the, what is that black and green creature where the power and toughness are each equal to all cards in all graveyards. The, I can't remember his name. What the heck was his name? I have tons of copies of him too. The, somebody help me out here in the comment section. Star power toughness equal to all... Oh, it's right there on the tip of my tongue. As soon as I stop thinking about it, I'll think of it. So he was in there, and, just a bunch of big creatures to help Mimeoplasm do what he needed to do. Additionally, you got some mill strategies, some other recursion strategies, milling your opponents, stuff like that. But I also did have some other little mini packages involved, too, because like I said... as I have been saying during these series when I talk about my decks, I keep the same deck throughout the whole season and then just refine it, put in little packages, do different things with it, accumulate the points I need. So as the season went on, it definitely kept the graveyard feel, but I also put a couple of other packages in there, and one of them was, this one's going to hurt a little bit to share with the audience, but I wanted to get that store championship back. I won it in my first year. I was one land away from winning it in my second year. I was one untimely Patriarch spinning away from winning it in my third season. I had to get it back. So in this Sultai Mimeoplasm deck, I included a Mike and Trike package. For any players out there who are unfamiliar with that interaction, the Mike and Trike package is an infinite combo built around Triskelius or is it Triskelion? Oh, which one is it? I think it's Triskelion. It's whatever creature says when it comes into play, put 3+1/+1 counters on it. And then you remove a counter to deal a point of damage to any target. And then Mikaeus the Unhallowed, which says non-human creatures you control have Undying. So you can see where this is going. You take off a point of damage from Triskelion when both creatures are in play. Do a point to anything you want. You take this is the tricky part now. Make sure the second counter that you take off of Triskelion is used to deal the damage to Triskelion. And once Triskelion dies, it goes to the graveyard, and then the Undying trigger from Mikaeus the Unhallowed triggers, and it comes back into play with the counters, and then rinse, repeat, deal direct damage to all opponents, win the game. That was one of the combos, and that was almost always, folks, it was almost always fetched out with an Entwined Tooth and Nail. That's one of the greatest cards ever made for Commander, Tooth and Nail. It was almost always entwined, came right out, right from the graveyard, right into play, and then that was it. To kind of change that up a little bit, to make it a little more varied, there was also a copy of not Primeval Titan, Woodfall Primus. Woodfall Primus was also in there. He was, I think, 5 and 3 green. He had the Persist mechanic, which meant that if he did not have any -1/-1 counters on him when he dies, you bring him back into play and put a +1/+1 counter on him. Or no, I'm sorry, he comes back into play, you put a -1/-1 counter on him with Persist. So with a sacrifice outlet such as Altar of Dementia, you are able to sacrifice Woodfall Primus for 6 mana. I'm sorry, let me reframe that. You sacrifice the Woodfall Primus, mill someone for 6 cards. It goes to the graveyard. Its Persist triggers, and or because you get to choose how you stack the triggers if you have Mikaeus the Unhallowed in play as well. So when Woodfall Primus hits the graveyard, you have the choice of to bring him back for the Persist trigger or to bring him back with the Unearth trigger. Now, of course, you want to make sure you bring him back with the Unearth trigger, because that way you can sacrifice him again and bring him back from the graveyard, because he will not have the -1/-1 counter on him. And therefore you can sacrifice to mill another 6 cards. Oh, and did I fail to mention that? I think I failed to mention that when Woodfall Primus enters the battlefield, you can destroy target non-land or non-creature. I think it's target non-creature permanent, because this is green, so it's probably non-creature permanent. So you have the ability to disturb everyone's land base. Not proud of that fact. Don't think I did that very often, because if I was going to do the combo-y thing, it was most likely going to be with Triskelius and Mikaeus the Unhallowed. It was not ever about Woodfall Primus primarily. I think it was a few times. I know the mill factor definitely was. I had to have been targeting some kind of permanence when that happened. But anyway, so yeah, it was a pretty grindy deck. Pretty not as eloquent as my previous iterations in the LGS League. So let's skip forward through the season. We get to the end of the season, make the Invitational. First pod of the Invitational for Season 4. In an interaction that will live in infamy, I have my opening hand, and you know how it works in Commander. You have your opening hand, and as the early turns go on, you're sculpting your hand. You're thinking about a few plays in the future, what you want to do. You're keeping this card for this interaction. You're keeping that card as removal. You're making sure that your hand is as strong as it can be throughout all of the turns, all of the games. I'm sorry, all the turns, all the rounds, making sure that you have the mana available, sculpting the hand. So then it finally gets to a point in time where it gets to my turn, and I'm able to tutor. I can tutor for something. I think I had a demonic tutor, actually. So I cast the demonic tutor. I'm like, all right, this is it. I'm going to start to go off. We're going to get this table cleared off. Going to get to the final pot. I'm going to get that championship back. So I tutor for my card. I put it into my hand. I'm shuffling up my deck. I'm like, oh, I've got this. After spending all this time, After spending all this time shaping my hand to be exactly what I needed it to be. So I shuffle up my library, hand it to my opponent to cut, put it down, reach for my hand, and I don't know where my hand is. I'm like, where's my hand? What happened to my hand? It's 7 cards in my hand. Where's my hand? I had inadvertently shuffled it into my deck. Yes, inadvertently shuffled my hand into my library when I tutored with my demonic tutor. Grab the card, put it face down on top of my hand, and some way, some shape, some form, I don't know if it was just the overexcitement of figuring out what I was about to do, lack of detail, maybe I was tired, I have no clue, but I shuffled my hand into the library. Judge comes over. This apparently had never, ever happened before. I say to the table, and I say to the judge, there's just absolutely no way that you could know what was in my hand, or for anyone to give me the right to believe when I say is in my hand. So I am going to choose to forfeit the game. It was a terrible mistake. It is something that I should not benefit from in any way, because how do you even continue with, I mean, it's not like the table can say, okay, go pick up the cards that you think you had. How does anyone know that I wasn't trying to quote unquote intentionally do that? I mean, I know that I wasn't trying to really do that. They know that I wasn't trying to do that, but it's the message that it sends. It's a precedent that gets set. And after a quick thinking, it seemed like it would have been a pretty dangerous precedent to set. And it was one that I did not want to have my metagame at the LGS, my Commander League, have to go through. So I had offered, I will forfeit this match based upon this error, because it just should not, the table should not be put into a position like that. And that was a tough decision, and the players at the table, they said they understood, but they knew me, they knew my history. I had played with all of them many, many times for years. They said, we can just go through your deck and just give you, there's 3 players there, 3 other players at the table. Each player can just go through and pick out 2 cards to put into your hand. But then, even if we take that route, I'm sitting there with a suboptimal hand, and then what am I doing for the rest of the game outside of just hoping that I can draw something to do something to someone? It just, either way, it just didn't seem like it was going to be a win-win situation. And unfortunately, I opted to just say, I'm going to just forfeit. I'm just going to turn my cards in. I will mark this as a loss. I will not move on to the final pot, and I get that. It was a mistake. It was a costly one, it really was. But I think from an honor standpoint, from a metagame standpoint, and from, just from, not even for saving a face, but just to show a respect to the game, a respect to the integrity of that league, the integrity of that LGS, it just seemed like it was the right thing to do, to just forfeit the game and then just let the other players play on. I'll take my consolation by playing in the second pod which I did play in the second pod. I did win the second pod because there's there's the champion pod after the invitational top 8, and then there's the consolation pod. I placed first in the consolation pod. So for that season, I placed 5th in the invitational, and it was due to my own mistake. And since that time, never, ever do I shuffle my library without putting this on top of my hand. Little dragon shield metal, I don't know if you can call this a medallion or a stopper or whatever it is you want to call it. I never shuffle my library, and I haven't since, without putting this card on top of my hand. Because I will be damned if I ever cost myself the potential championship like I did on that fateful night during my 4th season of my LGS EDH League, playing with that Sultai Mimeoplasm deck. Out of hurt, out of embarrassment, out of humiliation, the deck was then just torn apart, cannibalized into other parts, and never saw the light of day again. But it still hurts. That was a tough one. That was a tough loss because I felt like I didn't lose. I felt like I beat myself. But it'll never happen again. It'll never happen again. All right, folks. It's been real. This is MTG Burgeoning. This is your channel for humiliating Magic stories.